All right, so it's about time to start. Hopefully everybody can see us all right. Hello everyone and welcome to Lemberg IoT Talks. Today's topic, building an AI-based healthcare platform for remote patient monitoring. And this is a platform which is built by Carepath Technologies GmbH, an innovative startup based out of Berlin. In just a moment, I will introduce you to their managing director and the rest of the speakers. Before I go ahead and do that, just a quick note from myself. So when we've been sending invites to startups and IoT agencies in our network who are now listening to us, you guys mentioned the overall importance of building such solutions in healthcare, especially during pandemic times, right? And mentioning that it's the future of healthcare. So this was pretty inspiring, and we realized that sharing the aspects of what it really takes to build such things would be valuable to our community. Right. So yeah, let's take a look at our speakers today. So Daniel Young, Managing Director, Carepath Technologies. Hey, Daniel, how are you today? Could you please go ahead and give a shout out to our audience today?
Oh, good, Slavic. Thanks for inviting me. And just for everybody's benefit, my name's Daniel Young, and I am the co-founder and co-managing director for Carepath Technologies here in Berlin.
Great, thanks. Yes, so Slavic, that's myself. Most of you guys already know me from the previous webinars. I oversee business development at Lemberg, so I'm often in between business management and technical teams. In this webinar, I will be moderating this discussion today for the next hour, and by the end, we'll have a nice Q&A session to answer all your questions. Next is Anver Shykhmahomedov, project manager at Lemberg. We work a lot together with Anver. Hey, Anver, how are you? Do you mind sharing a few words about yourself so our audience can get to know you better?
Hey, Slavic. Hey, everyone. I'm Anver, project manager at Lemberg. I have got 8 years of professional experience overall, and for the last 4 years, I'm involved in IoT. I started my career as a QA engineer, and so I have a deep technical understanding of the software development lifecycle. I have been managing various software dev teams, following best Agile methodology practices. And to name a few domains where I have been delivering projects, it's smart buildings, industrial IoT, wearables, healthcare, and smart home. In this webinar, I will be sharing useful advice related to project management. So hopefully all the startups who are listening to us today can learn from it.
Great, thank you guys. So let's see, what do we have for today? Yes, as you can see from our agenda, we will be covering 4 major topics. So first one is product ideation, road mapping, and building the team. Next is designing, scoping, and planning the development of core platform. Next is managing cross-functional teams to deliver a well-integrated product. And the last point is continuous product development while avoiding feature creep. And then we'll wrap it up with some closing notes and Q&A, of course. Without further ado, let's get the ball rolling. So the first part is here about product ideation, road mapping, and building the team. Daniel, I think we can start with you. And first things first, could you tell us a bit more about your background, past experiences, and your relation to healthcare sector, and then eventually how the Carepath idea was born?
Yeah, sure. So I have been working in digital health since the early 2000s, so virtually like 20 years, if you would. And I am originally from Cleveland in the US, and in that city there is a big hospital system called the Cleveland Clinic, and they have their finger, so to speak, in a variety of different areas. So back in the day, I had actually managed an agency doing digital product development, much like your agency, Slavic. So I have some familiarity with the environment with you work. But life choices and things brought me to Berlin. And a few years ago, I had the pleasure of meeting my co-founder and co-managing director through a referral. And when we met, really it was over dinner, and it was over kind of a discussion about, how can technology help to address the needs of an aging population? And those conversations are really kind of the foundation and were the first seeds that later became Carepath. So to kind of go back into time, around 2018 is really when we started talking about this. The concept was that demographics are shifting in Europe and in North America, that we have an increasingly aging population, but we don't have a proportionally increasing number of caregivers that are able to look after geriatric patients or just elder citizens, if you would. And so we saw a possibility there that we could use technology as kind of a sentinel to look out after people who live by themselves at home, or people that looked in a care agency, to try to become like an early warning system to say, hey, these patients need attention. These patients might be getting sick, or they might be struggling a little bit more than what they have been. And so the thought was, can we look at building a system that can monitor these patients and provide caregivers some hints as to, these are the people you should be paying attention to. So that was the original impetus for getting Carepath started. And then on that kind of day, we decided to get going with Carepath. The first real steps were looking at, well, what's the current state of the art, and really where is there room for tangible innovation that we can convert into a product. And so basically what we were doing was we were looking at what are some of the elements of the standard of care, scoping out like what the need was. And as we started to see a more clear picture, that's when we decided that there's something here, and we wanted to commit some resources to it. So by the end of 2018, my co-founder Adam and I decided, let's move forward with this and let's see where it could take us.
Great, awesome. Thanks for sharing that. All right, so let's see next. And so once you mentioned about this idea and how it was actually born, how did you go about formalizing the concept? Like writing a business plan was probably your first thing, and then of course doing a market analysis, user research, defining the core components and features. Like, how eventually did you build the roadmap, kind of like we see on this next slide?
Well, the key thing that kind of started off, I should go back to talk about my experience working on other digital health products. There was one example that kind of illustrates a trend that I unfortunately noticed and have seen all too often within the digital health space. And this was a project I worked on where my team and I developed an app to measure concussions in American football players. And it was co-developed with the Cleveland Clinic, and Apple was very much involved in the project, and they even featured our app on their homepage for a month in 2014.
Nice.
A lot of money was put into this app. We're talking probably north of 10 million invested in building out the concept, maybe probably much more than that. Anyways, to make a long story short, the technology worked, the company and the business model completely failed. Even big players like that are not guaranteed success in this market. The main reason is that the researchers and the technologists, I would say, because they were tinkerers that were working for the hospital system, found out that you could do really incredible things with mobile technology, and so they started doing it. But what they forgot to really look at and explore was, how are they going to get paid? How are they going to get reimbursed? And in the US market, as in Germany, you have to accommodate health insurance companies that need to have you present new technologies to them in such a way that they could quantify it, study it, evaluate it, find that it's relevant, and then admit it into a reimbursement program before you can start generating revenue. And that missing piece is explains 95% of some of the healthcare startup failures I've seen, that they never really put the time into it. So that was our focus in 2018, was to define what kind of technologies could we introduce into the healthcare market? How would they be reimbursed, and what would the features and functions of those technologies need to be in order to conform to what these health insurance companies wanted to do? So the research led us from an idea of building technology to monitor geriatric patients to a point that is really what Carepath is today, where we're using a much more refined technology, a combination of IoT, AI in the cloud, an API, a front-end web design, responsive web design, and mobile app, all around healthcare and monitoring symptoms in the patient, so that it became from a care app to a medical app. And that switch came mid 2018, late 2018, before we really said, all right, this new strategy is going to get more traction and we're going to get more revenue from it. And then as we realized this was the path we needed to go, we could finally start designing some of the requirements around it. And as I think you guys recall, because for the benefit of the audience, I think our first conversations with the Lemberg date back to early first quarter 2019, maybe a little bit later than that.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah, but I wrote a document that was maybe in the 70 to 80 page range that outlined, what the business purpose of Carepath was, what were some of the demographic trends, what were the changing regulations and laws and initiatives by the German government, and then defined personas that fit within that environment. So our lead character, Frau Frisch, is what we now use internally to describe, why are we building this app? It's to benefit her and her home and take care of her. And then the requirements of the different elements of our system that needed to be built. And that would include a mobile app, that included, at the time, cloud infrastructure, IoT, other sensors, things like that. And then we presented it to you guys to take a look at. And I think that plus some of the other supplemental information provided you with a lot of general context and knowledge about what we were trying to achieve. But really, that's where the research ended, and now we got into design to say, all right, we're committed to now building this, so let's get it done. And from mid 2019, that's really where we embarked upon this. And today we finished our first generation product. It's out to patients, and now we are planning the future. So.
Cool, great. Thanks for sharing that story. So we'll, of course, show our audience more as we move along the slides. So next, once your roadmap was kind of drafted and you had your first 80 pages requirements document there, how did you go about building the team? Like, if you can say a few words, like what was your thought process, option consideration at that particular time? And of course, like selection criteria for which path you would like to take here.
All right. Well, as I mentioned before, I did manage a design development agency, and so I've been in your side of the client vendor relationship. So, having that benefit of being in both sides gave me kind of a better perspective of how to really utilize resources. And what I knew was that I did not want to staff up a large development team under Carepath. I mean, we don't have enough time to go into reasons why, but the general themes are that it takes a long time to recruit, that once you recruit people with certain talents, that they will be able to kind of develop in different areas, but you're pretty much building out a team that's very purpose driven. We had too many different things that we needed to tackle to make that a viable option. So let me illustrate. When we got started and decided that we were going to make a medical product, the very first thing that we needed to do along that path was research medical literature. And we spent a considerable amount of time, probably about 5 months, 6 months, collecting medical literature that supported our first, what we call symptom detection module. And then once we had looked at that, we hired who's now our head of research and development, to start building algorithms to replicate what we read in the medical literature in code. And that was a very much an R&D endeavor, that there was no certainty that there was going to be a successful outcome. And so there was a lot of flexibility that was necessary there. In parallel to while we were doing that, and we did have confidence that this was going to work, but still, we didn't want to necessarily distract him and have him be a developer to do everything. We know, and I know, we needed to have an elastic staff built underneath him, or around him, I should say, that could carry out the infrastructure that we needed to be built. And that would include the cloud infrastructure, architecture for Microsoft Azure Cloud, features and functions in our mobile application, which at the time we thought was very valuable, and then ancillary systems that are on there. That is a very clear business case for using an agency to do that. And that's why we engaged you guys, because you could provide us with a deeper bench. That bench could be elastic so that you could build up smaller teams around the different components that we needed. And as each component got done, you could pass it to a QA department. You could go through the testing and you could follow our requirements on project management and quality management, and also documentation that were very important for a medical app. And so those were things that you guys brought to the table that really complemented our core team of AI researchers. And so that's kind of how we looked at, scheduling out the project, looking at available resources that you guys provided with us, also the different skill sets along the technology stack, but also too on the team compatibility that you guys carry a very high level of professionalism, and that complemented our team and kind of the culture that we have at Carepath.
Great, thank you, Daniel, for explaining that. So yes, I think we're clear on that point. Let's move on quickly. Yes, so okay, we're about to start talking about the next section, which is about how we scoped and planned the core platform. Once we look at this huge 80-page document, right? I bet Anver remembers that, and Anver is the best person to describe this section. So let's take a look at what Anver's got for us. Yes, so Anver, could you please tell us, how did your first engagement look like when you first met with Daniel and he pitched you this idea of building a healthcare platform? Like, how did you go about assessing the whole scope of work? How did you select the team? What will be that will be brainstorming on this, right? And then estimating the project, of course. So what approach did you take to estimate this huge amount of work?
Sure, I remember that first call with Daniel. He made a professional impression on me. At that moment, we discussed the very basic requirements of the upcoming project on a high level, of course. We touched a bit of device certification, Azure infrastructure, and our expertise in it. Daniel had the answers to all of our questions with the details around everything, which meant for me that this project will definitely have a distinct future. The next couple of days, I was reviewing all of the specifications. And the more I read, the more I understand that this is not a simple healthcare project. It's a larger healthcare platform. The plan was to support physical devices, backend and frontend, apps for tablets, machine learning, and even wearables. So what I did first after finishing my spec review, I just shared it with our tech leads, backend, embedded, iOS, and data science. I choose one person from each technology department that was mentioned in the specification. The next day, we jumped on a brainstorming meeting, and everyone shared their thoughts, ideas, possible risks, and etc. Of course, we generated a bunch of questions and assumptions, but the main point which everyone agreed was to split the whole project into smaller pieces, which can be clearly scoped and estimated. And I remember that also made sense for Daniel. So we aligned our first MVP scope, and that was the real first step to move forward with this project.
Great, okay. And like, if you can just share in a few words, what was the process like for, picking all those specific requirements and designing the first solution architecture?
The process of requirements classification and drafting the architecture for the core platform took us a while. Initial tech inputs were known for us, so we just designed a very first architecture based on Microsoft Azure, as it was one of the main requirements. And every week we had around 2 or 3 calls where we discussed user needs and feature requirements. And before we actually started the development, we went through around like 5 or 6 iterations for architectural design, and every time we improved was adding more and more details to it.
All right, cool. Okay, so that gives us an idea about this initial engagement. Next is, so I see you suggested Scrum here. So can you briefly tell us the main reasons why?
We suggest a Scrum methodology which will provide a functional incrementing by each sprint iteration, and at the same time keep a product always in working condition. So in general, Scrum, it's a pretty common approach for startups based on my past experience. And most of the projects that I'm managing before also were using Scrum as a more suitable and flexible approach. So that's why we choose Scrum for this project.
Cool. Okay. And yeah, so every software team has a process they use to complete their work, right? So, and then like establishing it as a workflow makes it clearly structured, repeatable, of course, scalable. So could you please tell us what specific workflow did you implement in this project?
Let me think. Yeah, so we built our process in a next way. Carepath team is responsible for providing user needs and software requirements. And our team, Lemberg team, is responsible for converting those requirements into implementation tasks with estimates, which also includes acceptance criteria and test cases. And the main important thing here that before moving such stories into sprint, we aligning the acceptance criteria and the estimates with Carepath team. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Alrighty, so let's move on. Yeah, so I see you want to talk about kicking off product development, but first of all, like, how did you pick a team that will be assigned to this project? I assume this was based on their skills, past experiences, seniority level, team vibe, these things. Yeah.
Okay, good question. First of all, team selection was made based on the sprint scope that we aligned with Carepath project manager. I remember in that moment, like first sprint, we were working on backend and firmware features. So for that purpose, I chose 2 senior engineers, one per each technology department, to lead their directions, and 2 middle engineers that can normally develop scheduled tasks, plus 1 QA engineer to test their work. Of course, I have a personal feeling about complexity of the upcoming features, and I know the guys based on our past experiences. So I just picked the most qualified engineering team at that moment, I would say.
Gotcha. And what specific responsibilities did you agree on with Daniel just before kicking off the development? I assume you had a discussion about that. I mean, like, who does like the backlog, the grooming, prioritizing of different tasks, estimating, planning, and then did you have like dailies, weeklies?
Yeah. So as I mentioned before, the Carepath team is responsible for providing us with high-level software requirements, which is the user stories, with their expectations as well as priorities for the next couple sprints. In other words, it's a simple roadmap. Based on that, we are preparing scope estimation and suggest a logical scope to go with based on the complete length of the features. I mean the communication between parts of the platform. Regarding dailies, yes, we have dailies and weeklies, and for some period of projects, we have even like dailies. Yeah, I just said okay, and also the sprint retros, and we're still doing that with all stakeholders by the end of each sprint. Also, our dev team follows the Git flow approach, with creating the pull requests and reviews by their tech leads.
Cool, great. And yeah, so just a last quick question. Yeah, so like I assume you had some QA requirements, of course, from Carepath. So what was your main challenge there? Like, can you tell us more about the QA flow?
Yes, so regarding the process of matching a client's expectations, we suggest using acceptance criteria and test cases. Our QA is responsible for that, so he attaches test cases per each dev task in Jira. And for that, for this, we are using a special Jira plugin, which is called Zephyr. This is also useful for developers. They can go through the test cases and validate their results before deploying anything to the dev environment, for example, or stage or production. Yeah, so this is.
Cool. Okay. Great. So I think we can move on here. In our next section, we'll talk about management of agile cross-functional teams, as it says here. And most of my questions will be for you, Daniel. But I will ask Anver just to jump in if we need him.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So Daniel, I think it would be valuable if you could please explain the project management approach from Carepath perspective, like how Carepath project managers managed the process, how they communicated and aligned with Lemberg team on priorities, and what were like the typical issues they faced. Anything that startups can learn from you is appreciated.
Well, I think I'm going to answer your question from that perspective. As you know, I've worked with a lot of startups as a mentor. Obviously from your side, don't want to beat that horse too much, but after I got done with my consulting days, I was serving as a mentor for Techstars and some other accelerators here in Berlin. And I've seen a lot of different ideas, but the one thing I've seen are also patterns on who've been successful as startups. And the structure that I found was interesting is startups that have a good project manager on their team that can act as a medium, if you would, between the stakeholders who are usually the co-founders and the engineering team tend to be more successful because project managers do a good job, a good project manager does a good job of communicating ambiguous requirements from the business side of the team to tangible requirements that could be better understood, processed, and then delegated by the technical team. And following that process means you have to get a good project manager in there. And so for Carepath, what we started off, when we started off development, which wasn't really that long ago, which was actually at the end of 2019, we put in place what I would say a strong project manager whom we really liked. And he was the one who started to organize really what the requirements needed to be for Anver and his team to execute on. That document that I wrote was a great place to start, but it wasn't enough really to produce the software that we needed. So the advice to startups would be to really think very hard about putting a big, not a big, but a very competent project manager who understands Scrum, who understands documentation, who understands how to communicate that, in a position of authority where they can kind of manage the players on the field and the different resources that are available, both internal and external, to keep everybody on task and focused. And that I think was very, very important for us. And as we got started, which this underscores what I just said, there were some regulatory changes that opened up an opportunity for us to be able to get our product into the marketplace sooner, but we had to get it done by May. And as we started to race towards that deadline, we brought on an extra project manager simply so that we had redundancy in that role. But we can also have them work as kind of paired project managers, if you would, to then be a double check on the documentation and to provide more throughput and to be more responsive for the needs of Anver and Lemberg's team in doing that. So that was, I think, one of my controversial decisions to my co-founder, but I really stand behind that because I think it got us on track and kept us focused to get to the deadline. So that's my kind of like point of attention I'd like to draw to some of the startups that might be tuned in today.
Cool, great. So I guess the takeaway from that is have a qualified project manager or project managers, and then preferably Scrum certified. All right. And Anver, can you just add a few words like it would be helpful if you can explain project management approach from Lemberg perspective, like how you communicated and defined business priorities with stakeholders, estimated plan tasks. What did you do to meet deadlines? Kind of like Daniel mentioned about the deadlines. Did you face any issues aligning different teams? I see here on the slide, there's like so many teams from design to embedded to QA, front end, back end.
I see what you're asking, Slavic. When we outline it and estimate the scope for the next MVP release, for example, we always communicate with Carepath project manager about feature priorities and what should go first, usually going through the list on a quick call. Regarding deadlines, we always based it on our estimation. There were a couple of times that the expected deadline was shorter than the one we based on our estimate. So in such cases, we allocated more engineering resources and we arranged task priorities inside the team. In general, regarding alignment with different teams, it's always more time consuming, than working with one single team. So it requires extra communication to ensure that everyone is on the same page. And since I'm the main contact point to all the Carepath stakeholders, I can also keep all teams continuously updated on business priorities and deadlines. So.
Cool. Yeah, that makes total sense. All right, so let's move on. Here let's talk for a while how Carepath team and Lemberg team align together to ensure a smooth development process. So Daniel, in your opinion, what are the most important things to keep in mind so that other startups who are also listening to us and want to engage with another remote vendor can take a note of that? Like how to keep your remote team updated on the roadmap. What if you came up with a new feature all of a sudden? Like, how do you make sure you onboard them quickly? How to make sure they understood the scope? How to do code reviews? Whatever advice you might have for startups.
Well, there are many things that I kind of want to say, but the first thing is communication, underscoring everything else that I could suggest. Having good lines of communication between our project managers and your team was fundamental in order to keep everybody updated on what were our pressing priorities, how our situation was changing as we learned more, and what we needed to get out the door and by when. So, for us as a startup, in the medical space, speed is not necessarily an adjective that's used to describe how companies operate. But we had actually this deadline thrown upon us of May 2020 that we were all racing for. And so as that deadline became more important to us, which beginning of the year, I would say, we had to then reshuffle our priorities around what we wanted to do. And as we interviewed more potential customers and we had more information about the work that we needed to accomplish, that definitely created new priorities, promoting certain things to the front of the line, and kind of demoting, if you would, other requirements that didn't become so urgent. So the important thing really was to share that information as best we could with you guys. And so we have daily stand-ups, we would have weekly alignment meetings, and so there would be frequent conversations and communications about it. We used Asana as a way of doing a general road mapping tool, and of course we use Jira and tools like that, to try to illustrate this is where we're thinking we're going to go, and to try to kind of explain the context of why the situation was changing, or at least that's the mandate that I gave my project managers to do, and obviously they did it to the best of their ability. But really, it's not just about saying this is what we need to do, but having it reflected back and making sure there was a conference between our teams to say, yeah, this is what we need to get done, these are the deadlines, and then negotiating that so that the time that was available to us, we could do what was necessary for the mission, not necessarily what we thought would be a cool feature. And so it helped us be a bit more disciplined and a bit more cognizant of our choices when it came to feature creep and things like that. So what we also tried to do, though, internally was really have thorough discussions and really kind of probe what do we really need to do. And so when we were doing that, we would talk about, well, is this feature really required? Is it performing the way that we need to? Will this be satisfactory to our customers? And try to sort those questions out before we then threw them over the wall and started saying, hey, our priorities changed, so that we weren't changing our mind too often. We're trying to get that kind of variability out early. So combined, all of that stuff hopefully had a positive effect on us being able to keep everybody updated and moving forward.
Great. Okay. Makes sense. Yeah. So the key point is communication, as you said, and making sure that you align well and quickly through all those daily, weekly calls with your team. All right. So, and Daniel, I know that for example, your in-house team is more focused on like the AI development, and probably we could make like a separate webinar out of this, but if you can quickly share with us, like what are the typical challenges with building your own AI team and how to make sure that you got your algorithms right?
Well, I'm not gonna get too detailed into how you develop AI. That might be a topic for another conversation.
Yeah, just a few quick words. Yeah.
But fundamentally, all algorithms start with research, that you have to really understand what the nature of the problem is in order to be able to build math, maybe math models or neural networks or whatever around, how you're going to solve that problem or how you're going to deal with it. So all of the work that we did was really based on a lot of reviewing literature about the medical literature about, what is a symptom, how is it described, how is it characterized, the different components of it, then building out models of how to replicate a means of recognition of some of these patterns and identifying them. It is also about building up a library of training data and data that we could run through our algorithms continuously to help train it, make them better, make the algorithms and the AI more intelligent and able to be more precise. Even though precise isn't necessarily the specific term I choose to use, it's just a general reference, meaning that, we had a general target and we were able to work and develop and train the AI to get within the envelope that we needed to. So the components basically are building a team that can help identify and collect data to build a data set, analyze literature that's going to be relevant to building out the algorithms, prototyping and testing the algorithms, then training the data or running the data through the algorithms to train it, and then generating a solid output that then could be commercialized. So when I say commercialized, that means it could be transported from an R&D lab and basically bolted on to the infrastructure and a lot of the stuff that you guys were tasked to build. And so that was kind of how our AI team interfaced with you, is that they were building kind of the jet engine behind the aircraft, and you guys were building out the wings and the infrastructure, and so to speak, on that. And so together, well, we had kind of two timelines. We were able to bring them together at the critical juncture and then combine our efforts to make everything work and then give it its final tests and really get it out the door in time.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. So thanks for explaining that. Let's just move on quickly. So Daniel, as you move along the product development path, could you explain roughly what your platform consisted of on the roadmap, and how did you plan the resources with Lemberg to have each portion of this platform delivered by a specific deadline? Like, what were the most important challenges here, and how did you overcome them? Any advice for startups again?
Well, first of all, time and money is not unlimited. I think that's an obvious thing that everybody knows. But in practice, a lot of startups that I've consulted with don't really appreciate that. Time is flexible, money can be raised, and things can kind of go on for an extended period of time. But for us, we had a hard deadline. We knew what time we had to file our application, and we knew what time the code had to be committed, proofed, and ready to go, and all this other stuff. That's not common, but with startups, picking a date and actually sticking to it and having the commitment to that date is important, because it gives you the discipline to now put a flag in the ground and say, from this point backwards, we can now plan everything. So that date, that commitment that you make as an organization has to be shared, and it has to be, bought into by everybody involved. That's including companies like Lemberg, other people like marketing agencies, investors, whomever's involved and has a primary or secondary stake in the game should obviously be in alignment with that deadline. But once you work backwards from there, you need to be realistic that things do take time, and you need a buffer at the end. So if you've got a deadline, let's say in 8 months from now, you really need to be done with development in 5 to 6 months, because you're going to need a lot of extra time at the end to debug, to test, to refine, to adjust, and to build robustness and responsiveness within whatever application you've got. That tends to get seriously ignored and underestimated by many, many startup teams. And so I would just stress that please be realistic about how much time you're going to need to make those final adjustments before you get to that deadline of yours. Now, the expectations need to be shared too, about, not only does everybody not know what the real deadline is, but they want to understand and appreciate that you're getting everything done months before that, because you need that extra time, and it's so critical to fix everything up and get it ready to go. And so you have to have open communications about what the expectations are from your team, what the timelines are, and how the tasks that everybody's working on interrelates to the other tasks. So these are really important, because then for somebody like Anver and the project managers, then they can start to plan resources around what's necessary to get it done. And the elasticity means that you don't assign 10 people for a project over 8 months. Some of them are working overtime and some of them are idle, but you build the team into chunks, into cells, so to speak, around what's necessary and how they can help propel everybody forward to get the maximal effect of the size and the skills and the specialties to get to that deadline. So you really have to have a reliance on that elastic team dynamic, but that's also going to be governed by your resource manager and your project managers and the vendor that you pick to work with.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. Yeah, and you explained it well. So let's just move on. All right, so in this slide, we'll talk about a very interesting aspects like security, certifications, and regulatory standards that come into play when we talk about healthcare product development, of course. So Daniel, could you briefly educate us about like medical device classification briefly, and what category does the Carepath product fall into?
Sure. So, I'm going to oversimplify this just for the sake of time and the point of your question. Medical devices are categorized based on the risk to injure or kill a patient, to be blunt. And so class 3 is the most severe risk class, where you're talking about surgical items, equipment in an intensive care unit, things like that, down to what's called a class 1 device, which has a possible risk to a patient, but not an imminent risk if that technology or that device fails. We, under the current MD regulations in the EU, fall under class 1. In a few months, all of our stuff will get promoted to a class 2A, and the requirements get much stricter. So the class 1 is basically that you can, there's procedures around it about getting the CE mark, about, you build software, you have internal auditing mechanisms that allow your team to validate that the software was built to a standard that ensures that what it's supposed to do, it does, and it does it well. It doesn't have bugs. It's stable, it's solid, it's robust. That there was supporting documentation about how the code was built, specifically around how it was checked in, how it was quality controlled, how it was basically built. Then you've got documentation around how requirements were made, they were set, they were executed on, and then they were followed up on after the product was delivered to ensure that this whole process is followed. That's called a QMS system. So understanding your risk class and what kind of documentation is necessary is really at the essence that what's necessary for a CE mark. So for class 1, a lot of that under the current standards can be done by the team themselves. So you can self-certify. Class 2A requires what's called a notifying body, meaning that you send your QMS and your software and everything else to a third party that will then audit it, review everything, and then give it a stamp of approval that what was produced matches the requirements of the documentation and that processes were followed to do it. And then you have clinical trials on top of that to then validate that it does what it's supposed to do. With class 1, you can self-certify that, so you can do your own tests to get that, okay? Now, what's missing from these certifications are specific regulations around patient data privacy and personal data protection, as you got it in the slideshow. And so that's something that we put on top of this. And there are obviously requirements under GDPR and in the US under HIPAA and whatnot about what you as a medical software provider or technology company must do to protect the patient's private information. And a lot of that, though, what's tricky is about the procedures that you write in your QMS and your documentation about the steps that you're going to take to prevent data breaches. That's a detail on there. So you could be really simple or you could be robust with it. But for what I would recommend for startups and what we did for ourselves was try to bring the bar up as high as we could and make sure that we took extra steps around protecting a patient's privacy. So in our application, in the device that you see here, which I can show you, this is our Nila device, not plugged in, but this is basically what we now produce. We have various security things that we can't really talk about, that when it's listening and collecting information in the home, we process that on the device, we identify what's medically relevant, and we send that to our cloud. But we do it in such a way that we kind of distribute information to different systems so that there's a level of security and privacy about that, that we're not putting the Frau Frisch's name on the data packets we're sending, but we respect it a little bit more. These are general best practices, but I can't go beyond that because we're encroaching on private information. But the thing is that you have to think through, what needs to be protected, why it needs to be protected, and how the state of the art is. And so what we did is we hired a security expert. We consulted with Lemberg and your security technologists, and also with Microsoft and other people to kind of understand what's everybody else doing so that we could kind of come up with our own bespoke system to do it. But it's up to us to decide really what the standard is, and that we put policies and procedures in place that we have to now follow, that we've committed ourselves to, in order to ensure that patient data information is secure and safe and basically accessible only to the people that need to have the information.
Cool, gotcha. All right, and Anver, can you just add here, like, how did Lemberg respond to those security requirements? I heard Daniel said they hired like another third-party agency for security aspects of it. So yeah, so how did you work with them actually?
Sure. So Carepath involved a security consultancy agency to review the project requirements and also device source code. And as a result, they provided potential security vulnerabilities and suggested a plan on how to handle most of the cases, split by security levels. All of these levels have potential priorities for business users, etc. During like next couple weeks, we had lots of iterations and discussions with stakeholders where we outlined our goals. The main recommendation which we took into our product was a third-party hardware module, which covers most of the security requirements for us.
Got it. Okay, interesting. And Anver, can you like be more specific on that? Can you tell us like which specific security features you've implemented?
I'm not sure, Slavic, I can disclose that because this is an NDA information and we will be pointing fingers
got it.
into those places. So yeah, sorry.
Yeah, then I take it back. So yeah, I guess you can't answer that. All right. So okay. So for the sake of time, let's just keep on moving. So we're getting into the last section of our webinar, and I think it's the most interesting part. I believe our audience today should have a bunch of questions by now. So just feel free to just post it in the Q&A area and we'll read your questions soon. So you can go ahead and start doing that while we go through the last section. Yeah, so what's your success formula, Daniel? Like, how do you keep focus on developing your core, and have you ever experienced feature creep?
Yeah, well, I think feature creep is a thing that's a constant pressure on all projects. So that's something, it is, because every time somebody says, oh, I want to build a button, that button will then eventually have, well, let's do a right click on that button and it'll do something else. There's always somebody with an idea of how something can be different or better or improved or something like that, which is all fine. I mean, that's part of product iterations. But the thing is that you have to recognize that good enough is good enough, and defining what's good enough needs to be written and agreed to in a non-emotional state, if you would, so you can embark upon doing a project where you have kind of known requirements that this is good enough to achieve the objectives that we want. Because it's so tempting to just do incremental small improvements along the way that seem obvious at the time, but you didn't forecast when you got started. And the thing is that can distract you from really what you need to be doing, because what's good enough is still good enough, and to your users, to many users, they won't understand these additional potential improvements until they've spent time with your product. And in order for them to spend time with your product, you need to just get it done. And so good enough gets the product in the hands of your users. Then you can start to improve it to address kind of concerns and feedback and updates that they want to do. And that's something I think a lot of companies tend to miss, that when you try to introduce something, you want to try to make it this grand, perfect, awesome thing. But in reality, almost every time you produce a version 1 of anything and you look back on it from 3 versions later, you realize how embarrassing it is. And if you don't feel embarrassed by your version 1, you've done something wrong. So feature creep is about just doing what's good enough, and then having the discipline to commit to just doing what's good enough. And that's how you really don't lose sight of what you need to produce. And so it requires kind of a team commitment to say this is good enough and everybody to sign off on it and not second guess decisions, so to speak, when they go on, unless there's a real compelling need that says, you know what, that button needs to say it's a button on it for people to understand anything that they need to do with it. And that, you know, could be construed as a bug, design bug or something like that, but still it comes back to just know what's good enough, try to stay true to that, and then move forward in building what's good enough to get your first version out the door.
Yeah, I think you put it well here. And then I guess you also train your team in some way to identify product scope changes early on. So it sounds like you're all well aware of how to stay focused.
Yeah. Well, you know, I want to go back to a comment about medical device regulations and classifications.
Uh-huh.
To get a CE mark, part of that QMS is how to build it. You have to build in change management. So theoretically, if you start your product or you embark on a digital health platform, you should also embark on a QMS system at the start. Do it, even if you're not going to go regulated, it's good practice, but you can borrow from the internet, you can download templates, but change management's important. And that's when you identify, is this change critical to the function of the product? Is this change just simply to enhance the operation or performance, reduce latency, or is this change just basically an operational thing to make it easier to manage? You know, if you start to think about change management as like, how do you develop a philosophy of questioning it, scoring it, and then deciding, is this change really that important that you want to disrupt the sprint planning and the timelines? Then you could kind of have some process to evaluate internally when you come up with ideas, rather than being so rigid about saying it's not in our original list, so we're not going to do it.
Got it. Okay, yeah, so you have to keep in mind all those documentational things early on. Cool. Great. So yes, here we can see a slide with a user interface of the Carepath platform. And this is what I meant when I said that this is the interesting part of the presentation. Yeah, of course, it's just a sneak peek. And we can't disclose too much before the product goes live. But I think our audience can appreciate the screen just to get an idea of a general UI UX experience for doctors, right? Yes, and so in like the foreground, we can see the user dashboard with the login, but it's the background. But the foreground is like the screenshot with patient information, list of patients, and then collected patient information, and then this builds into a graph. All right, so this gives you guys an idea. Next, we have just a general architecture. Anver, could you please explain this quickly in your own words so that our audience can better understand it? So for the Praxis portal, we saw some of the screens already. Just could you tell us how the edge device works with cloud and what cloud services you're using?
Sure, I can answer this one. So imagine our edge device is installed at the patient's home to monitor the symptoms remotely. And then the edge device collects audio data, but we disregard personal conversations. And then we upload all audio files to the cloud, marked as COFs. And the audio files are going through the whole verification logic to the AI module. And as a result, we receive cough detection results, and that should be stored into the database. This is how the system will know what is normal patient behavior, like how often the patient is coughing every day of the week, and then if there are any deviation from normal behavior, the doctor can receive a notification on their user interface. Yeah, that's actually the whole flow.
Great. Okay, so that gives us an idea. Cool. So let's move on. Okay, so the Nila device, Daniel already showed us that device. Yes, from his home office. Yeah, so that's how the hardware device looks like. Is the first prototype. I guess Daniel, you're shipping this very, very early. I mean, soonish it's going to be in your doctor's hands. Is that right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's Thursday today, so in about 10 days, the first patients will have them in their homes.
Cool. Great. You must be excited.
It's definitely it's not just the end, it's the beginning of a big journey. So there's a lot, even this, in this space, I mean, yes, we are excited, but there's also, we're humble about the efforts that went into building it and how much work is still, going to come, so to speak, to really see our vision through, because we built this to help patients, and ultimately getting the device into the home is where we get started, because now it's about getting the information that we processed into the hands of doctors and really helping them understand how to use this to treat their patients.
Right, got it. All right, then, yeah, so for the startups who would like to follow what Carepath is doing, can you give an idea what they can expect from you in the near future? Like, so you plan to roll out by end of this year. What's your plan for 2021?
Yeah, I mean, without getting into too confidential areas, I mean, generally the mission for Carepath, by the way, is a digital tech company, but Neela, this is our product. And while it doesn't look like much, there's a lot of thought that's gone behind it and planning. That this goes in a home, and one of these is an edge computer. The other ones are kind of intelligent sensors that are there. And what we're going to be doing in the near term is getting those organized and out to the field, where we've got kind of good coverage within a home of the passive sensor arrays that we're putting out there. So those are going to be, that's being developed in conjunction with developing out additional symptom detection modules. Our first one is coughing, which we've done. We're focused on on pulmonology and cardiology. So the next batch of SDMs that we're currently doing the R&D work on now are really focused around breathing and some heart conditions and whatnot. Our goal right now is a big push to get ahead of this new deadline that I mentioned before, the new MDD, MDR deadline coming up in May. So our team is really focused on isolating the ones that we're going to have the highest probability of making and getting those out the door. So that's really going to be the embodiment of our version 1.1. And then once we do, we have a plan for a couple clinical studies on how we want to really demonstrate that the combination of these symptom detection modules really has a tangible impact on certain diseases and that we're tracking and we're working with our medical advisors on. So that's going to be the fundamental thing that we're going to be working on. And as we do this and we start to come up for air, we're going to start writing papers about it and sharing not only our technical insights with this, but trying to help open up the doors a little bit more about how we built this and how we went about doing it. So hopefully it can be an inspiration to other people. And I think to follow what we're doing, the best way to do it is to connect with me on LinkedIn or look for updates on Crunchbase. And we don't have a blog yet. We have a very modest website, but we may potentially put actually some content there too at some point. So, no.
Great. Okay. So so our audience can take a note of your LinkedIn handle. That's Mr. Daniel Young, just to connect with you on LinkedIn. Great. Thanks so much, Daniel, for explaining that. Yeah, so this marks the end of our presentation, and we'll start reading your questions in just a moment. If you'd like to stay updated, follow us also on LinkedIn. It's Lemberg Solutions. Or if you want to check our website, it's lembergsolutions.com. So I'll leave this slide open for a while, and then I can go into the Q&A real quick. Well, actually, I'll go ahead and stop screen sharing just to check the questions we have. All right, so the first one we have here is, what has been the most challenging aspect of this journey and how did you overcome it? What have been key factors to success? So Daniel, do you want to take this one? Talk about success factors?
Well, success is a relative term. Getting the product to a point where it's out the door took a monumental effort. And it was, a mandate from our investor to say, we want to meet this deadline. And so there are a lot of people that were involved in with you. Besides Lemberg, we have our industrial design agency, a fabrication lab in Taiwan, part suppliers in the United States. So our supply chain kind of spanned most of the Northern Hemisphere, if you would. And that happened to all come down in March and April when we were finishing production of the first units. So with COVID-19, that was a really interesting interesting challenge to overcome. But I think the professionalism that all the teams carried in working together on this and trying to commit to a solution was the thing that carried the day. Because I think just a contrast. I've worked with a lot. Ran an agency. I also know lots of people that have run or managed or worked with agencies. And there's people that are organized and professional and follow a certain way of getting business or doing business and doing their work. And you guys were very professional in doing that. That was really important. And so was, everybody else. And I think professionalism was really top of mind. And even though the myth with startups are that, hey, move fast and furious and break things is kind of the ethos, it belies that successful startups have a professional culture and they respect that. You can wear casual clothes to work, but you can't have a casual mindset about getting the work done. And I think that's really important to underscore.
Yeah, that's a good point here. All right, thanks, Daniel. The next one is, did you guys have situations when there was a new feature or a major change to this feature that was needed, but you already planned for the sprint? So what did you do in such case? So Anver, I think you can answer that one.
Yeah, I can take this one. That's a good question. Yeah, we have such situations. Every case was unique, of course, but in general, extra features or additional scope during the sprint happened for us a few times during last year. So what we usually do in such situations, first of all, we are trying to understand the requirements and clients' expectations for this extra request. And based on that, we provide our estimate and suggestion of reprioritizing the existing sprint scope and what we can cut out and move to the next sprint, if it's possible, of course. And yeah, and after alignment with the Carepath project manager, we take that into the sprint. Yeah, so that's actually how we handle such cases. Nothing special, I would say. Yeah. Right.
Okay. So the next one, did you have any deployment challenges? Yeah. So okay. Anver, maybe you can also answer this one
as well. Okay. I don't remember that. Actually, yeah, I don't remember that we have any like super complications like around deployments. To be honest, we had some complex tasks, of course, for our DevOps. That's true, like set up Kubernetes cluster or migration of AI module into one Kubernetes cluster where all the cloud parts are running instead of keep two separate ones, which is a bit hard to control at the same time. Yeah, because at the beginning of the project, AI module was developed as a separate project. That's why we have like two Kubernetes clusters. But usually our solution architect, which is a backend tech lead in our case, always assists our DevOps with such type of tasks and consult regarding appropriate approach. Yeah, so that's probably the answer.
Got it. Okay. I'll read the next one. Yeah, just here quickly. What is the overall budget for accomplishing such product? That's an interesting question. Daniel, do you want to answer about the budgets for the project?
We're very well funded to get started with this, and it wasn't cheap. Be honest with you, though, I'm not at liberty to comment on specifics about the budget, but I can start breaking it down if you're really keen on doing it. Development costs are going to be in the hundreds of thousands. I'll just flat out say that. Okay. We got sponsored by Microsoft under their startups program, and they gave us 120,000 in Azure credits to get everything off the ground. I'm intimidated. I have a feeling that if I keep going with this, I'm going to scare people that might be operating on more of a shoestring budget. But bear with me for a moment. The general costs of this your development limber, the staffing costs that we have, the people that are on payroll, if you would, that get paid every month, and obviously salaries vary depending on what region you're in. I think I looked at some of the attendees, and I'm gathering that there's a wide geographic bandwidth on this. But you've got the software development cost, the design cost, the engineering cost, but then you've got the hardware stuff. And the hardware stuff is really the tricky unknown that a lot of software people don't realize. We opted to go with as many off-the-shelf components as we possibly could to build out our electronics in our case. And that was simply because the cost of developing bespoke custom boards and IoT stuff can be easily 50,000 euros to 500,000 euros, depending on how much detail and complexity goes into it. So you could be talking, hundreds of thousands to millions if you start really trying to build everything all at once. So the takeaway on that one is you need probably a good investor or other avenues of bringing in cash to do it. And one of the things that's not really talked about as much as it should be is grant writing and applying for grants. So, you could defease a lot of the cost with your product and your product development if you get started on the grant writing path earlier. I think one of the calculations that we had made was we need to get a product out there, and this is just that. But if the time pressure is off a little bit, you can build an MVP that proves out a proof of concept with off-the-shelf devices that isn't like necessarily market ready, but at least it can validate the concepts that you've got. You can work with Lemberg to do kind of a sandbox environment that's not production ready. You can work with an NVIDIA Jetson or some other board computer to prove an IoT compatibility, and then write a nice grant about this is how I would spend 500,000 to commercialize this product. That's what grants are out there for. The EU has grants, many countries have grants, even regional governments have grants to help startup founders build really robust R&D stuff, especially if they're moonshot things. And what we're doing with Carepath really is kind of a moonshot because nobody, as we found out along the way, really put all these pieces together in this kind of configuration. And what we found out is, as we were told by one company, we're beyond state of the art with what we're doing, and it's intimidating, but that's what grants are there for. So it may cost a lot to get this out the door, but there is opportunities for you as a scrappy entrepreneur to put together a good pitch to a grant and be patient and probably get rewarded quite well if you do it right. But still, it's going to cost you. It's not cheap to do this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Okay. So thanks, Daniel, on that one. Next, so I was wondering about the makeup of Carepath's medical advisory team. What type of doctors do you work with? Daniel, I guess that's for you.
Yeah, that's pretty clear. We have two levels of doctors. We have ones that are doing kind of medical advisory kind of across what we're doing in pulmonology, cardiology, and just as a general approach to the medical industry. We also have specialists that are in pulmonology that have helped with our first symptom detection module. So what they've done was they've reviewed, presented us with literature that we may not have seen before. We've used them as a sounding board to say, this is what we're going to do. Do you like it? Do you not like it? We've shown them prototypes and we've given them devices to test. And they've provided feedback on it, how it aligns with how they handle and manage their patients, and that's been quite valuable.
Right. Okay. Next is what makes a great team attributes? Like what kind of attributes we can talk about here? So I don't know, Daniel, do you want to answer this one as well? Maybe
sure.
it's too general, but yeah, if you can comment on that.
No, I think, when you're building out a team, having trust, you have to have, this sounds like a cliche, but culture is a very important thing. And culture, what that means is that people like being in the same room together, and they gain energy by being together, not give energy. So it's not a zero-sum game, it's actually a multiplier effect. And having trust in your teammates, and that includes vendors, that includes consultants, freelancers, whomever. You've got to be able to go in there with a vision of this is what I want to try to do. but recognize that you don't have the skills to do it all yourself. And so you need to build the team. And so the people that you bring on to join you in your team, or the team you choose to join, you need to be able to be wind in the sail, so to speak, to help push the whole mission forward, but also be able to trust your teammates that they are going to be able to help everybody else kind of find weaknesses, strengthen those weaknesses, and push the project forward to achieve the mission. And so the ingredients really kind of revolve around trust, compatibility on a personal kind of and professional level, but also that you're bringing the right skills to the table, that you complement each other. So, maybe, you have good back-end skills, you've got good business skills, and you've got good project management skills, and that can make a nice team of how you could all work together. Compositions could be different, but those are generally the trends that I think have made Carepath successful thus far.
Great. Okay. Okay. Another one just popped up. Do you offer equity to your team?
We have different compensation programs, and obviously stock options are part of these programs that we have looked at.
Got it.
But equity is a catchy thing, because I just want to be clear. You've got founders equity, you've got non-voting share equity, you've got ESOP programs and things like that. They're all different, and our composition is unique to us. But if as a company, you can use those levers as you need to. But you really should think through what they are, because I know it's a myth to say, hey, some developer is going to get started, or you're going to start working with this designer, and they're going to get a share of founders equity going forward. It's actually more complicated than that, especially in Germany, because there's tax basis that you have to get and you have to earn. So if you're thinking about offering somebody equity, you should definitely consult with a tax advisor about how you might want to structure a program. But it is on the table. Great.
Okay. Awesome. So I think that's pretty much it. Yeah, unless anyone throws in a last minute question here, but yeah, I don't see any other questions for now. So thank you so much, everybody who made it an interesting event today and contributed. Yeah, we appreciate your time, of course. So yeah, connect or follow us just to be on the lookout for the next event. But otherwise, I wish you all have a good rest of your day or evening, depending on where you're at.
Great. All right. Well, thanks for the invite, for being a part of this. I enjoyed the conversation, and anybody who's there, good luck with what you're doing. And again, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you wish.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Anver. Yeah, I think we can end the webinar now.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Take care.